This year, we have been challenged as a global community, reminding us again there is no viable business in a declining environment. Taking better care of our people and our planet has moved into the C-suite as top-level priorities. Because sustainability is smart business. There is no turning back, only forward. Join us in rewriting the future as we guide you on the path to real change through sustainable business practices that protect our planet, our people, together.
Welcome, and thank you for joining what I know is going to be a really interesting panel discussion from commitment to action. I'm David Sproul, Deloitte Global Deputy Chief Executive. I've always been a big believer that business has a responsibility to be a force for good in the world, to genuinely put profit and purpose in balance. And the topic of climate change is at the top of the agenda for all CEOs and leadership teams globally. I'm thrilled to be joined by two other business leaders who I know share the same sentiment. So let's introduce them. Firstly, we have Judith Batchelar. She's the Director of Corporate Responsibility, Sustainability and Public Affairs at Sainsbury's, one of the UK's largest grocers and retailers. And we're also joined by Rebecca Marmot, Chief Sustainability Officer at Unilever. Judith, Rebecca, I'm delighted you can both join me today to share your perspectives on how business leaders are responding to the expectations of stakeholders, customers, or employees in meeting client commitments. And I'm going to just kick things off with a data point from the recent Deloitte survey climate check-in with over 750 executives globally. Now, in this report, 82% of executives said their organizations are concerned or very concerned about climate change. And my first question to you is, given you're both focused on corporate sustainability, fairly or unfairly, there's a lot of sentiment among commentators, journalists, the media, that the business community is all talk, no action. So what are your views on that? And Rebecca, maybe we start with you.
Thanks, David. Well, I think there's lots of action. There's been a massive acceleration in recent years, initially Paris and the SDGs. And I think all of these topics, not just climate, but the wider sustainability agenda, has become much more mainstream. We've seen it with a huge ramp up in ESG investing. Celent report, I think yesterday, predicted it's going to grow to 53 trillion by next year. And we've seen it with consumer behavior as well. We know now, Kantar put out a report recently showing that brands with a strong purpose grow about 175% faster than those where they don't put that front and center. And I think that's because consumers really, really care about that. And we've certainly at Unilever really been taking action on that since the company began, but really formally since 2010 with the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. And again, back to what I just said with Kantar, we've seen our sustainable living brands, so when we put sustainability and purpose front and center, grow twice as quickly. I think on climate change in particular, there has been an awful lot of action. It's been hugely accelerated, I think, by the pandemic and the realization of how much nature and society are completely interwoven. Certainly at Unilever, we've made a lot of tangible actions, starting internally in our own business. We've got 100% renewable energy now across all our global operations. It saves a lot of money, over £1 billion, £1 billion for us since 2008. So crucial. This is about business as well as about doing the right thing. We've reduced our total waste per tonne by nearly 96% since 2008. And we've really, most recently, put out a climate transition action plan. So we're taking that to an advisory vote at our AGM in early May. So really actually mapping out short, medium and long-term goals around how we're going to achieve our climate targets. And for us, that's about being net zero across all our operations by 2030 and right the way from sourcing to shelf by 2039. We've looked at our own supply chain. We're going to replace all the fossil fuel derived carbon that goes into the cleaning products, the laundry portfolio, and replace that with renewable or recycled carbon, be deforestation free, just 2 years time. We've said that, and half our use of all of our plastic, virgin plastic by 2025. So I think there's a ton of action going on. I do understand that there is some skepticism. I know there was an Oxford net zero research recently that said, I think it was just over 20%, the world's biggest corporates have set net zero targets, which is brilliant. It's great progress, but obviously that means that we've still got nearly 4/5 to go. But I think companies are waking up to that. We've seen that with the open letter to the Biden administration in the States, 300 businesses calling on the president to cut GHG emissions. So if we can do that before COP, I think that will be a really, really massive step.
Rebecca, thank you. And there is definitely in that survey I mentioned, the Deloitte Climate Check survey, that there is a lot of feedback that reinforces your point. Companies are taking action. It isn't just words. But we know there's some skepticism there. I mean, Judith, maybe you could tell us from a Sainsbury point of view what Sainsbury are doing to drive climate action in response to climate change, and how, as in doing that, you're also trying to address that skepticism that some commentators have that there isn't really action behind all the words.
Well, like Rebecca, there is a lot going on, and you can see that in the commitments that people have made and some of the actions that are being made. But I think one of the key things in all of this is a lot of the action that's taken place so far is in companies' own operations, because those are the things that's easy to fix. So whether that's the decarbonisation of your energy or heat or refrigeration, what you're doing with lighting and all the other things, transport, electric vehicles, and those things aren't particularly customer facing. The things that are customer facing that we're all working on require us to work across a long and sometimes complex value chain, because we're going right back to agriculture upstream and then trying to influence consumers downstream. And that's difficult. So I can understand why people think that there isn't much progress. We do know, though, that there is a massive consumer demand for those things, and therefore all the motivation for a business to do the right thing for our customers. I would say, though, that as you progress along this journey to net zero, one of the things that is really obvious is that it's very complicated and you have lots of false starts. And I think one of the things that we've learned in that journey with the complicated, evolving science, evolving data, so the more information you get, the more you know, is that actually it requires a great degree of collaboration. And therefore, you can't actually drive things in isolation. You have to drive things together. And as you will know, collaborating is easily said and difficult to do in practice for all sorts of reasons. But I think everyone should feel really reassured that all of us, whether it's Unilever, Sainsbury's, and the broader system, is working hard together with coalitions of action, coalitions of the willing, coalitions of the ambitious to really work together. Because, of course, whether it's climate change or whether it's the nature crisis that we're experiencing and these very real emergencies, they know no geographic boundaries. So whether that geography is Sainsbury's shops and stores and our supply chains, or Unilever's, or those boundaries are the geographies of the world, those things disappear because actually these just are global problems that require us to collaborate. As I say, I think people should feel reassured that we're doing those things, but it is very complicated, and managing the trade-offs between whether it's water, whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's plastic packaging, all of those things require us to be very thoughtful and considered. And if you look at any of the plans that are out there, everyone would say, I probably know how to do half of this. The other half is going to be research, it's going to be innovation, it's going to be seeing what works in practice. But there's certainly no lack of commitment across the sector.
Well, I want to come back to nearer term, because it's really reassuring from both of you that there is action. There is real, genuine action taking place to move forward. One of the things in the survey that I mentioned that surprised me was that over 2/3 of the respondents said that COVID had caused them to slow down climate action. I'm interested in both your perspectives, whether the pandemic, which of course everyone's had to reprioritize, but that's actually been an impetus to do more and go faster, whether it has caused things to slow down. Rebecca, maybe you could go first.
I completely understand. Over the past year, a lot of businesses have been focusing on their own employees, their own operations, thinking about their supply chains and dealing with the immediate shock of the pandemic. But I find it genuinely really mind-boggling that people wouldn't actually continue to realize now, even more than before, what the impacts of a global crisis have been. We've seen it with COVID on society, millions of jobs and livelihoods at risk, terrible health crisis, people dying, just so hugely upsetting. And from an environmental perspective, we've seen an increase, for example, in the use of plastics again. So, really now the message for me is prevention is far better than the cure. This is a crisis as well, the climate crisis. And we've got to take action now. And, certainly we haven't, or I'd like to think, we haven't taken our eye off the ball. There's a climate crisis in isolation, but actually everything that's happening around nature, around biodiversity, around water, migration, biological, is also interconnected together. So I think actually really now is the time more than ever to actually double down and take action. And I think even if, we're not switched on to being able to project 2, 3, 5 years into the future, if you don't take action now, certainly thinking from a consumer goods perspective, there's already an impact from climate change. Thinking, for example, about how growing seasons are changing around the world. Actually, we talked a little bit earlier about agriculture, the impact of different kinds of pests, of floods, of droughts, changing water availability in India and Brazil and California. That impacts the way that people are living their lives. That impacts the way that people would certainly use products, for example, in the Unilever portfolio, whether it's to do laundry, whether it's cleaning, whether it's cooking. So really thinking about that, combined with the livelihoods of people who are very much impacted day to day by climate change. For us, that's thinking about the farmers. So again, that interconnection between social and environmental. So I certainly wouldn't advocate holding off at all. I think as well, I mentioned in my first answer, this point around ESG investing, and certainly we know the pandemic seems to have accelerated the move onto ESG and greater importance being placed on companies that are able to show they can survive negative shocks and prove viability and sustainability in the long term. And we've seen that Fidelity recently with a study that they put out saying companies with better ESG ratings, less prone to market volatility, have fared better during the pandemic.
Judith, maybe a quick comment from you on, has COVID caused you to slow down, accelerate as you think about those actions you've already got?
Actually, the reality is it's forced us to become even more focused, because I think what the pandemic has shown us is what we're capable of, both individually as a business. So what Sainsbury's have delivered throughout the coronavirus in feeding the nation, staying open, keeping our colleagues safe, keeping our customers safe, doubling our online deliveries, all of those kinds of things, shown us what we're capable of as a business, but also shown us what we're capable of in collaboration with others. And indeed, the way that government and the private sector have worked together throughout the coronavirus to keep the nation fed has been exemplary, I think. And unprecedented. And I know that word's been used a lot, and it feels a bit like an understatement given where we are on all of this. But I think if you take, for example, the shielding of the clinically vulnerable, within the space of 36 hours, every single retailer in the UK shared their online information with an independent third party. Those data points were cross-referenced with the clinically vulnerable that had been identified was 1.7 million people with their NHS records, all in the public interest. And then 65% of those 1.7 million were identified and prioritised for online shopping, all in the space, as say, of 36 hours. That is a phenomenal piece of data sharing work in a pre-competitive environment, with government facilitating that in the public interest. And if if that's in the public interest, then certainly the climate and environmental crises are definitely in the public interest for us to sort. So I think there's some really good examples of what's happened over the last year that should give us confidence that we can work differently to deliver against this additional set of emergencies. And I think is probably surprising to us all, because if you had said to me, would you predict that you would work with your competitors and government in the way that you have, that would have been a large stretch for my imagination, but we've shown it's possible.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example of the point you both made around the new normal has to include far greater collaboration, whether it's commercial collaboration or with governments and other stakeholders. One of the things that we've all seen is both bigger, bolder net zero goals being put out there by company leaders, sector leaders, but also more scrutiny on ESG measurements, more demand from investors. Is that extra scrutiny, is that extra focus on long-term goals, is that helpful to you in what you're trying to achieve, or unhelpful in terms of trying to stay focused on what's got to get done now?
The answer to that question, David, is definitely yes, because I think the more scrutiny, the better. And I say that because no single person can work this out on their own. As we've said, it does require a great degree of collaboration. And transformation requires systems shift. And quite often when we talk about the system, we don't identify all the stakeholders that are required to make that shift. And it is the NGOs, it is the policymakers, the regulators, it is competitors working more collaboratively. And unless we have the input from all of those stakeholders into the debate, we will not create the systems shift we need to see. And of course, we need to see that quickly, and we need to see it at scale. And unless we can convene all of those people, and investors included, because finance plays a huge role in this, and investment with things like the race to trillions will play a huge part in this. Unless we have that dialogue, that conversation, then we won't move at the pace and scale that we need to. So I welcome it. I think we will all be the better for it. And the more that we can create those safe spaces to have those conversations and to create that system in the room, as it were, the better.
And also the point on collaboration as well, I really agree with you. We often at Unilever talk about what we call the multi-stakeholder model. And I think that focus on climate is really, we're seeing it from all the different stakeholders that, Judith, you were just talking about. Some of them are people as well. Are really, when we do employee surveys at Unilever, pride in working for a company that puts sustainability front and center is 94% in our last employee survey we did at the end of last year, as to why people want to work at Unilever. And I think that's even more to the fore and more prominent, actually, when you look at Gen Z and millennials. They want to work for companies that are taking action around issues that are important to them. Definitely, we've seen it with consumers. Again, consumers wanting to buy from companies or from organizations or brands that represent issues that are important to them, whether that's around climate or whether it's around society. Tons and tons of data that came out during the pandemic around people taking views on companies and organizations as to how they'd approach the pandemic. I think over a third of people in the Edelman study that was done recently said they stopped using the products or services of companies that they didn't feel were engaging around sustainability. I've already talked a little bit about shareholders and the increasing flow of capital into ESG funds. But, on this real transparency point, I mentioned at the very beginning, the Climate Transition Action Plan that we are taking to an advisory vote at the AGM. That's really laying ourselves open to scrutiny, because we're saying these are our targets and this is the trajectory for how we're going to get there. To Judith's point, this will require operating in a different kind of way. It's going to require working pre-competitively, on things like sustainable sourcing, ensuring deforestation-free sourcing of all those key crops and commodities that are important. Really a massive shift as well. Judith, you talked about customers at Sainsbury's, they're our consumers too. We've put a €1 billion fund out recently to invest in climate and nature solutions to help us reach our targets. And we're going to bring that to life through the consumer-based marketing that we're doing. So really, for example, through Ben & Jerry's, they've had a campaign recently, if it's melted, it's ruined. We've been doing this with Persil here in the UK. We've been doing it with Seventh Generation. So really using the power of our brands to talk about A, the importance of climate change, but also B, what can I do as an individual to make a difference? And I think also, lastly, governments as well, more and more governments setting net zero targets. China, US, UK, the EU's new Green Deal. And again, I think with that will come scrutiny and pressure from stakeholders to say, well, great, you set these targets, but how are you going to deliver them? So, I agree with you, Judith, 100%. I think it's great.
So, Rebecca, what advice would you give to those businesses who are just at the start of this journey, are just recognizing the need to change? What advice, based on your experience, would you give to them as to how they have to approach this to get to that point of really embedding the change in their business model, whatever business they're in?
Well, David, I'll get on my soapbox about this because it's something that I, often I'm talking about and thinking about. I think for me, there's four main areas, actually. The one is you've got to have an aligned business and sustainability strategy. So exactly to your point, this isn't anymore a sort of nice standalone charity initiative that, is on the side. It absolutely is core to the business. We relaunched our, what we call Unilever Compass just a couple of months ago, which is our joined up business and sustainability strategy. So definitely it's got to be joined up as the first point. I think the second part is it's got to also drive sustainable growth. So, this, I would like to think, outdated conversation about, well, is it sustainability or is it growth? They are and can be one and the same, and I think you do that by making sure it's totally aligned into your business. So, for us in future foods, it's about thinking of plant-based alternatives, better for the planet, good for your health, or, could be positive beauty, which is what we're doing in our beauty and personal care portfolio, really thinking about our consumers and how they enhance their own well-being, remaining true to their values, et cetera, et cetera. We've launched, as I said, this €1 billion fund as well. So absolutely linked into driving growth. I think the third part is it really has to be integrated right the way through the organization. So that means into the governance, into the way that you're doing your external counsel, into the strategy, into the structure, make it part of your reward. I think that's hugely important as well. You've got to actually hold people to account within the company. And of course, when you do all of that, it really helps to then change the culture around sustainability. And then I think lastly, really proving the business case. So we've done a ton of work over the years on what we call our growth, cost, trust, risk model. And when we're looking at business decisions, we put that matrix onto it. And actually, ideally, sustainability is going to be driving at least 2 or 3 of those different metrics in all the big decisions that we're making.
Judith, your view from Sainsbury's, it's that the advice you'll give to those who are in the foothills of this, based on the experience you've had.
Yeah, and again, I agree with everything that's been said. I suppose the things that I would add to that is it starts at the top. So boards have to lead by example. And I think one of the things that we've done is a massive effort in upskilling our board, and some of that with Deloitte and Chapter Zero, and basically bringing all directors up to the same level of understanding, because this is quite technical and it's complicated and it's all new. So, you have to move together on that or people get left behind. So yes, get the board up to speed and get the board leading from the front. I think data is incredibly important because, again, you have to prioritize where you put your efforts, and materiality is everything in this. So making sure that you're investing in really good data, because that's the management information that the teams that are actually at operating level need to be able to make sure the interventions that they're going to make are timely, cost effective, and create the biggest impact. I think that's easy to say because, again, it's difficult and the science is evolving. So the other thing I would say is bring in the experts. So spending a lot of time getting the outside in to come and talk to all levels of our management around very specific topics. And of course, because we're a retailer that sells tens of thousands of products sourced from all over the world, there are no generalizations. So every product, every country it's sourced from, every commodity, every situation we find ourselves in is a unique combination of data, from greenhouse gas emissions to biodiversity, water, all of those things coming together. And unless the teams that are working in those areas have got that data, they can't make informed decisions. And I think the other thing is, don't underestimate things. I think it's Bill Gates that said most people overestimate what technology and innovation can deliver in the short term, but underestimate it in the medium to long term. So I think aim high on the basis that in the medium to long term you can deliver those things, and share successes, because I think we haven't got time for us all to individually learn by trial and error, and best practice and what works actually is fundamentally important in this, because, as I say, we need to move at pace.
That was excellent. Judith and Rebecca, thank you. I think this has been a really excellent conversation. Thank you for being candid and sharing your experience. We all recognize tackling climate change and creating a more sustainable, responsible future is our collective responsibility. It's not easy, but I hope you've learned from the feedback and the comments from Judith and Rebecca. It can be done. We've had some great anecdotes of how two leading organizations are putting it in place. It's not only the right thing to do, it's also the right business thing to do. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to Judith and Rebecca, and thank you to Business Insider for organizing this event. Thank you.